White House and Senate to Republican hands and expand the slender House GOP majority. A majority of conservative lawmakers were eagerly waiting to hear from the presumptive GOP nominee for president, who is meeting with House Republicans in the morning and Senate Republicans shortly after. The reports coming out of those meetings is that people were so gleeful and so happy to see Donald Trump that they were actually singing the happy birthday song. And more than 14,000 Texas patients crossed the border into New Mexico for an abortion last year. An additional 16,000 left southern states bound for Illinois. And nearly 12,000 more traveled north from South Carolina and Georgia to North Carolina. These were among the more than 171,000 patients who traveled for an abortion in 2023. These estimates demonstrate both the upheaval in access since the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the limits of state bans to stop the procedure. And the U.S. Department of Justice announced today that it is investigating the Phoenix Police Department and the city over potential civil rights violations and abuses of power. The DOJ Civil Rights Division under Kristen Clark will review the police department's use of force practices. It will also look for patterns of retaliation over actively protected under the First Amendment and discrimination against people with disabilities or who are homeless. Also today, far-right Ohio Senator J.D. Vance introduced the Dismantle DEI Act of 2024. This is legislation that targets DEI programs, which he asserts is a destructive ideology that breeds hatred and racial division. Okay, the bill specifies higher education institutions cannot develop, implement, distribute, publish, or purchase a course or substantially similar courses related to critical race theory, sexual orientation, gender theory, sexual identity, intersectionality, and more. According to Vance, these principles or concepts have no place in our federal government or anywhere else in our society. All right, Donald Trump's presidency delivered to Christian conservatives some of their most coveted goals. Hundreds of sympathetic judges joined the federal bench. The U.S. Embassy in Israel moved to Jerusalem, and the center of gravity of the Supreme Court shifted firmly to the right. Now, since Trump lost his re-election bid in 2020, the Christian right have claimed additional successes, with Republican-run red states enacting legislation that restricts transgender care and limits the books that can be taught in school or borrowed from the library. These Christian conservatives are looking to leverage these wins and gain even more under a Trump presidency in 2024. And the Supreme Court today upheld access to a widely available abortion pill, rejecting a bid from a group of anti-abortion organizers and doctors to unravel the Food and Drug Administration's approval of the pill. In a unanimous decision written by Brett Kavanaugh, the court held that the plaintiffs lacked standing to challenge the FDA's actions. The case had returned the issue of abortion access back to the Supreme Court, even as the conservative majority in overturning Roe v. Wade declared that it would cede the question to the people and their elected representatives. And Fulton County prosecutors today asked a Georgia appellate court to dismiss Donald Trump's appeal of a state court ruling allowing Fani Willis to continue prosecuting the 2020 election interference case against him and his allies. In this filing, the assistant Fulton County district attorney and prosecutor on the election case argued that Donald Trump and his co-defendants failed to produce any evidence that would support Fani Willis being removed from the case. And in final news today, after a failed vote last week that would have ensured nationwide access to contraception, Democrats today voted to enshrine protections for in vitro fertilization. However, the bill did not advance to the floor of the House. Now, this in vitro fertilization, as we know, is a fertility procedure that has helped millions and millions of families have children. and expand access to the treatment for service members and veterans. But Republicans said the American people should not have protection or access to IVF procedures. This is the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. In this hour, hour two, this is the hour where we dig a little deeper. We go behind those headlines and bring you those stories that people are talking about. And what perfect timing today to be one-on-one with Dr. Calvin John Smiley. One, because his new book out called Defund, Conversations Toward Abolition. And two, because today we got that big announcement from Kristen Clark and the Department of Justice investigating the Phoenix Police Department and the city of Phoenix, Arizona. So perfect time to be talking about the movement that we saw after the uprisings of the summer of 2020, the defund movement, and the work that was being done after George Floyd was murdered to really reimagine, rethink the way policing happens in this country. Dr. Calvin Smiley decided to explore this issue of defund by interviewing some of the nation's leading thought leaders and organizers who have been intimately involved in the work of trying to reform our police system, our system of policing. So I'm super excited to sit down with Dr. Smiley to, one, learn what some of these thought leaders had to say about the defund movement, ask him whether, as some people believe, the movement was misinterpreted from the start. The word defund became quickly a negative, a pejorative term, like we see now with critical race theory, like woke. It was taken over by conservatives and became, this horrible word, according to some. Even Jim Clyburn, senior congressman for South Carolina, said it was sloganism at its worst. So I'm going to talk to Dr. Smiley about the things that the defund movement got right and the things that they could have done differently, and some would say even better. And where are we today? What's the pathway forward? Thank goodness for Kristen Clark. Thank goodness for the Biden administration and the DOJ for taking on these pattern and practice investigations. But is that enough? And what happens if Donald Trump gets elected and he just eliminates the Civil Rights Division from the Department of Justice, which is pretty much what he did when he was president before? So we got a lot to talk about with Dr. Calvin John Smiley when we come forward, more about his new book called Defund: Conversations Toward Abolition. Stay with us.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Pardon the interruption. It's me, Tavis Smiley, here to remind you that we are now just days away from our historic Climate Justice Symposium live on C-SPAN this coming Tuesday, June 18th, 4 to 7 p.m. at the California Science Center. We are now pushing capacity. So if you plan to join us, stop procrastinating and get to KBLA1580.com right now and register. Attendance is free, but registration is mandatory. Black folk are flying into LA from all across the country to be in the room when we go live to the world with a stage full of Black brilliance on the eve of Juneteenth. And you live here, you better get to KBLA1580.com right now and claim your seat.
Become a U.S. citizen with the help of the Los Angeles Public Library. Get free and confidential information on immigration and citizenship. Visit lapl.org/NAI to find your nearest library or call us at 213-228-7390. That's lapl.org/NAI or 213-228-7390 and start your path to becoming a U.S. citizen with the help of the Los Angeles Public Library. Call 213-228-7390 or visit lapl.org/NAI.
You can do it all by yourself, baby girl. What's your name? Let me talk to you. Let me buy you a drink.
Spilled your drink? Quick, the quicker picker-upper. Bounty picks up spills quicker, and each sheet is 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less than the leading ordinary brand. So you can get back to your night. Bounty, the quicker picker-upper.
If you love to travel, Capital One has a rewards credit card that's perfect for you. With Venture X, earn unlimited double miles on everything you buy and turn everyday purchases into extraordinary trips. Plus, receive premium travel benefits like access to over 1,300 airport lounges where you just check in and chill out. Open up a world of possibilities with Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Lounge access is subject to change. See CapitalOne.com for details.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, home of the 2024 Climate Justice Campaign.
Watch out! You got me!
The galaxy is safe once again.
In the pretend universe, kids play with pretend guns. In the real world, it's up to us to make sure they don't get their hands on a real gun. If you have a gun in the house, keep it locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
We are back. Dr. Calvin John Smiley, who's usually with us in hour one as a brilliant contributor, professor at City University of New York. He is out with a new book, so he is in hour two today, which is unusual. And I'm so happy to be in a one-on-one conversation with him about his new book called Defund: Conversations Toward Abolition. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Smiley. Congratulations on this new book. And how coincidental is it that we're having this conversation today when the Department of Justice, Kristen Clark, head of the Civil Rights Division, makes this major announcement about Phoenix. And we're talking about these pattern and practice investigations that the Biden administration, the Obama administration, made the hallmark of their administration, and which were eliminated under Donald Trump's one term and likely to be eliminated if he is again elected. So we're going to talk about all of that. But before we get into that, let's start with your book. Well, first question I always like to ask my authors are, what was the catalyst for you writing this book? I know you've written other books, but why this book in this moment?
Well, first, thank you, Areva, for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. So the short or condensed version of how this book came about was that a colleague and I had written an article as kind of a response paper about mass incarceration, and some folks had put out some myths out there. And so Haymarket Books, who published the book, had come to us about writing a book. That didn't pan out, but I had this idea that I thought was only going to be an article about defund and kind of the thesis of the book. And when I had this opportunity to work with Haymarket Books, that has put out so many amazing progressive and radical books on topics of abolition and how to rethink our society, I really wanted to take that opportunity, and I pitched them a proposal saying, I have this idea around defund that I'd like to explore. Would you be interested? And I have this kind of more non-traditional idea of doing these interviews and having the book be written in kind of conversation form as opposed to just kind of a long form essay. And they took the chance on me, and however long later, the book is out.
Okay, let's talk about defund. As I was introducing this segment, I talked about that word, the slogan, defund the police. Your book isn't called Defund the Police, but it's about the police and our police system. Many folks, including our very esteemed veteran Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina, was very critical of the term defund the police. And it became a term almost like critical race theory. It was like a bad word in certain circles to say it. It got misused in a lot of cases, but talk about just that term and what's your visceral response? And do you think that term did harm or good to the underlying issues that it was trying to address?
So first, I would say that I think it did a lot of good. I think that the fact that we had President Biden at the 2022 State of the Union, part of his speech was saying that it shouldn't be defund the police, it should be fund the police, showed how scared politicians were of how that term was being used as a way of organizing and a way of capturing a particular moment within a longer legacy of movements towards racial equality, class struggles, and alike. And so I think where Democrats went wrong is where they've kind of gone wrong in a lot of these things that you mentioned. They, instead of taking ownership or being proud in that, a segment of the left, even if it's more progressive or radical than them, are trying to move the direction of our country towards these equalities and take ownership and get on board. They've shied away from it. And by shying away from terms like defund, critical race theory, wokeism, it allows for the Republicans and more conservatives to misinterpret and misappropriate the term. Because what we've seen was when Congresswoman Cori Bush said that she supported defund, we saw the Democrats turn on her. But while Republicans use defund and these other terms as kind of a boogeyman in many regards, they also reappropriated them as well. So we heard Marjorie Taylor Greene talk about defund the FBI when Mar-a-Lago was raided. We've heard Donald Trump saying defund the DOJ when he was being investigated. So Republicans very much understood the power of this term and how it could capture a larger movement. And so I think, Democrats really need to look at what defund is calling for and peel back the layer that it's not simply about anarchy, but it's about, in one regard, a pragmatic policy solution. And on the other end, it's about re-envisioning what public safety and promoting care looks like for our society, particularly those who are the most vulnerable in our society.
So I watched the term evolve. During the COVID, I started an online show called The Special Report, and I was on the air pretty much every day. And then it was 3 days a week, but I was on the air a lot, and I was interviewing lots of organizers, lots of folks who were on the ground in cities around this country, leading Black Lives Matters marches, just leading marches. And a lot of the people, Dr. Smiley, who supported the defund movement literally wanted the police to be defunded. So I guess for me, I kind of watched this evolution from those that wanted to abolish complete police departments, folks who would come on and say, we should have neighborhoods police each other. So if somebody breaks into my car, I'm not going to call the police. I'm going to knock on my neighbor's door. We're going to have neighborhood watch groups involved in police, watching, I won't use the word policing, but watching our neighbors to make sure nobody's breaking in your house or committing any kind of crime in your neighborhood, where they literally meant, nobody, go into cities and basically fire everyone that has the title police. And now us, community folks, do this work. And then I watched it evolve to, no. We don't mean fire the police department or eliminate police departments. We mean reallocate budgets. We mean, take the mental health piece away from them. We mean take responding to non-violent, crimes away from them. Take the routine car stops. So is it fair to say that the movement was always about reimagining versus just being honest? And I'm suggesting you're being honest, but just acknowledging, I should say, that there were people who literally believed then and still believe today that police should be eliminated from our system altogether.
Yeah, so to answer that, I think one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book was because I saw defund in summer 2020 as a major shift from previous Black Lives Matter movements, right? If we go back to the death of Trayvon Martin, to Michael Brown and Eric Garner, in the 2010s under the Obama administration, we heard a lot of people talking about various reforms, right? More diversity in hiring, more police bias training, de-escalation tactics, body-worn cameras. But what we've seen since that time, and the Washington Post being one of the leaders in tracking police-involved shootings and police-involved deaths, is that even with all of these reforms, cops continue to kill people. In fact, the number of people that cops have killed has gone up. And so 2020 became this kind of moment where people were saying, we've done all of these things, we've implemented all these policies, and things are not changing. And it allowed for a moment for a more radical voice to step in and kind of fill that void. Because let's put it out there, abolition of police, abolition of prisons has been a movement for at least the last 50 years. But we certainly saw it become more centered after 2020. And to your point about, the evolution of it, I would say that it's of the term is that it's run on parallel planes, right? That we've heard both voices kind of continuously, and it just depends on who you talk to in that moment, right? Some people are certainly reformists who've gotten behind aspects of defund to reallocate money. There are other folks who are abolitionists who are saying, no, this is the first step into eradicating the police. And while people might critique and say, well, that's just messy, or they don't know what they're doing, that's all social movements. No social movement is a clean through line. When the term abolition came up during slavery, there were certainly debates on what that meant. Did that mean sending Africans back to Africa? Did that mean integration? Did that mean putting them in some plot of land by themselves? When we look at the civil rights movement, I think of the Birmingham campaign, the Children's Campaign, and Fred Shuttlesworth demanding that there be Black clerks and Black shopkeepers in these stores, and others saying, well, maybe it just means desegregation. So there's constantly debate, and I think that's what the beauty around social movements is, that it allows us the space to have the opportunity to have those conversations openly, honestly, debate, argue, because it's how the needle moves forward. And if we just say, well, it didn't work, or, oh, it's all over the place, then we're defeating ourselves, because there's no social movement that starts with a majority of people behind it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a social movement. It's certainly that would be just the mainstream. And so most social movements start with a minority voice, and it grows and picks up steam, and it has ebbs and flows of how visible it might be at one point versus maybe people just doing the work behind the scenes. And so we have to allow that time for defund to continue to germinate and see where the movement takes us.
Well, that leads me to my next question. Where is the movement today? Because, you just raised a good point that oftentimes people are working behind the scenes. You don't see them. You don't hear about the movement, but it appeared that the movement died. Or like when I talk about the evolution, I felt like from the people I was interviewing, and clearly, I interview everybody in the world that was involved in this movement, but it felt like to me that the defund, what I'll call the abolitionists who really, really want the police system of policing defunded, eradicated, that their voices were overpowered by the redefinition of defund from, oh, no, we didn't mean really defund. We meant, take 10% of the budget and reallocate it, because that started to sound like folks making it more palatable, trying to make it more acceptable. And it felt like to me, or feels like to me, that the whole defund movement, was really pushed, into the darkness, marginalized and minimized, and that more people became of the let's reimagine. And I don't know, from your interviews and the work that you did for this book, do you feel like, or does your research bear out that the defund movement today is as strong as it was in the summer of 2020?
Well, I think certainly the defund movement, if we want to call it like broadly, I think it's certainly still going on, and we see it playing out in many different ways. And I'll explain that in a second. But, just to think kind of about social movements and social movement theory, we often look back at social movements in kind of like a snapshot way. So again, just to use the civil rights movement as an example, 1954 was Brown v. Board of Education. The Voting Rights Act didn't come till 1965. That's an 11-year gap where people were organizing, boycotts, marches, sit-ins. And we have to remember, Dr. King, across that 11 years, wasn't at a boycott or a march or a rally every single day of his life. It had, its own ebbs and flows. And so what we see right now is a lot of movement organizers organizing against things like cop cities that are happening across the country. We see, especially at the local level, people who are running for elected positions with a much more progressive position, particularly around defund or wanting to move monies away from police. So we see things like mutual aid, where people are sharing resources, sharing knowledge. I think why we also have seen this kind of defund fall from the spotlight has a lot to do with mainstream media. And not to just blame mainstream media, but mainstream media also follows, if it bleeds, it leads. And right now, thankfully, we don't have a hashtag name. So, but that could happen again, and we might see it kind of bubble back up in that kind of way.
Yeah. I'm talking with Dr. Calvin John Smiley. He has a new book out called Defund: Conversations Toward Abolition. When we come forward, I want to talk about how you're thinking about defund, because you're thinking about it in this really broad umbrella term. And I'm not so sure that's the way I understand it and a lot of people. So I want to really go a little deeper on how you are defining the whole movement of defund. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580, when we come through.
The right time. More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. President Biden says he's very proud of his son Hunter. While speaking alongside the Ukrainian president at the G7 summit in Italy, Biden spoke publicly for the first time about Hunter Biden's conviction on federal firearm charges. Biden said his son overcame addiction, adding that he's a great man. He again said he would not pardon his son and later added he would also not commute Hunter's sentence. Hunter was found guilty for unlawfully purchasing a gun while addicted to drugs. The D.C. Council is sending a $21 billion budget to Black Mayor Muriel Bowser's desk for final approval. The budget was unanimously approved in a final vote this week. The council altered the mayor's original budget proposal, restoring spending on programs like pay equity for early childhood education, while also raising some taxes. The council also restored funding to projects favored by the mayor, including a new D.C. jail. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
As you make your way through Baldwin Park, watch for an accident on the right shoulder of the 10 West at Fraser Street, with heavy traffic coming from Francisco Avenue, La Puente split. In Griffith Park, accident is on the right shoulder of the 134 East at the 5, with a 15-minute backup from Bob Hope Drive. Emergency guardrail repair in Irwindale continues at the right lane closed, with no estimated time of reopening on the 210 West between Irwindale Avenue and the 605. Slight delay runs stopped up to 10 minutes from Citrus Avenue.
When you think of your go-to meal, what do you think of? Because if it's not the Wendy's Biggie Bag with your choice of JBC or crispy chicken sandwich plus 4-piece nugs, junior fries, and a small soft drink, Wendy's Biggie Bag hits every time. So stop by and grab your ride or die meal. U.S. price and participation may vary.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers' search for a head coach is back in the news today. NBA sources are confirming that J.J. Redick will have formal interviews this weekend with Lakers owner Jeannie Buss and general manager Rob Pelinka. The Lakers had casual conversations with Redick in May during the NBA pre-draft camp in Chicago. If Redick does well in meetings with Buss and Pelinka, NBA sources claim Redick, who has no previous coaching experience, will move to the top of the list among candidates. The Lakers are trying to regroup after they were turned down by Connecticut coach Dan Hurley. Redick is one of the analysts for ABC's coverage of the NBA Finals between Boston and Dallas. Boston is up 3-0. If the Celtics win Game 4 Friday night to sweep the finals, Redick will have more time to visit with Lakers management this weekend. Stay tuned. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Yeah, y'all, come on.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we fight the power every day.
Yeah, gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Hey.
I listen to KBLA and I love the commercials. I know what the commercials mean. I also, if I'm looking and trying to figure something out, I need something to talk to me that might hit me. And it happens on TV because, every time they show a sporting event, they got the pharmaceutical companies back to back telling people how to fix the sickness on the same stuff that they sell them. So we get it.
Yep, we get it too, Chuck D. And that's why at KBLA Talk 1580, we don't black down.
Drop it. Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power. Fight the power.
Oh, man. Looks like Bobby needs a ride to the airport again.
Grab the keys.
Who's taking Auntie and her friends to the swap meet?
Grab the keys.
How about we drop these boxes off at Miss Johnson?
Grab the keys.
Whether you're giving rides or hauling gear, you're all about getting things done. So do it all in a Chevy SUV. From the versatile Equinox and Sporty Blazer to the roomy Traverse, our lineup of SUVs will carry you through every adventure. All you have to do is
grab the keys.
That's how we do. Head to your local Chevy dealer, where well-qualified buyers get 1.9% financing on all 2024 Malibu, Colorado, Blazer, Equinox, Trailblazer, and Traverse limited models. Chevrolet, together, let's drive.
1.9% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $28.60 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 15.8%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available with lease and some other offers. Take new retail delivery by 7/1/24.
What does it take to take on Alzheimer's? Awareness that nearly 2/3 of those diagnosed are women, including Black women. Dedication to lowering your risk by eating healthy and monitoring blood pressure. And confidence to talk to your healthcare provider about screening and early detection. You have what it takes to take on Alzheimer's. Learn about signs and screening at takeonalz.com. Brought to you by the California Department of Public Health.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Dr. Calvin John Smiley is here, and he's out with a new book called Defund: Conversations Toward Abolition. We were talking earlier in this hour, Dr. Smiley, about your definition of defund as being this broader term encompassing progressive movements, not just around police, but really tackling anti-Blackness and the uplifting of white supremacy. Before we tackle that and go into this kind of broader definition, I want to ask you about the decision to write the book using interviews from thought leaders and organizers. Why that approach?
So I think if you look at the longer tradition of abolition as both a kind of ideology as well as a praxis, it's very much about organizing, which you can only organize through communication. So in following that tradition, I thought it would really be an interesting and kind of innovative way to create dialogue rather than simply a monologue, because then it's not, it highlights that, you know, this is not just a single or one-trick pony type of term, but one that can encompass multiple meanings, especially across multiple contexts. So, for example, I talked with Professor Marisol Lebrun, who does a lot of work on the island of Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory, aka a colony. And a lot of her work looks at colonial capitalism. And part of the legacy of colonial capitalism, in which she discusses, is that there's constant defunding of the island of Puerto Rico, whether that's the University of Puerto Rico system, whether that's in terms of not enough aid to go around after hurricanes. But yet when the people of Puerto Rico demand justice through whether protests in the streets or what have you, there's always money for more police officers. So what is this? Is it that the island of Puerto Rico needs to practice fiscal conservatism and austerity, or is there just a plethora of money that could go to all these other resources? I also talked with Professor Jonathan Illen, who at the time was at the City University of London, and he had an interesting take about defund and how what was happening leading up to the summer of 2020 was that in England, there was already a defund by the conservatives in England, but it had to do more with, again, this kind of fiscal austerity rather than a more radical approach. And so it's really interesting to kind of bring all of these thought leaders to the table and have that conversation, because until we kind of figure it out ourselves, nothing can get done.
What's one of the one or two things that most surprising, I'll call it, things that you learned from the thought leaders that you interviewed for the book? Usually when you do interviews, you pretty much know what the person is going to say because you've read their body of work, or you know something about them, you've heard them speak. So you generally have a good idea about what they're going to say because you've chosen them to fit into your book for a reason. But there's always usually some surprise. Somebody says something you didn't expect. Who said that in this instance, and what is it that they said?
Yeah, I mean, just across the board, one of the things that was the through line with everyone is just how passionate they were about the work that they do. And I think one of the things that we can take from this is that everyone is doing something, right? I think oftentimes when it comes to social movements, we think in this kind of grandiose one stroke is gonna change everything. Not in a shocking way, but for instance, in chapter 3, community is a verb with Zeli Amani. Zeli is the president, the director of the Black Lives Matter Patterson, New Jersey chapter, but he's also a middle school math teacher. And one of the things that was surprising or something I really loved that he shared was how his work as an organizer doesn't stop at the door when he becomes a teacher, and he sees his role both as a public school teacher as well as an activist being interchangeable. Because when students are having a bad day at school, or maybe they're acting out, maybe there's a deeper issue, maybe there's something going on in the home, or maybe there's other issues that need to be confronted, and it's not just that the kid is being bad. And so one of the things that he implemented in his school was restorative justice circles, where students can talk about their grievances, both with faculty, about maybe faculty, about peers, in a way that is not going to be punishable in a kind of traditional sense. So maybe if there is an issue, the go-to would be detention or suspension. But here it's more about finding out what's happening first before going to those kind of automatic punitive protocols.
So again, I want to go back to my question I was asking about how you're thinking about defund as this global term, and as a social movement. Those folks who I said I interviewed, where I saw this evolution, where people were backing away in some regards from defund and abolition, moving more towards reimagine, reallocate budget. Did that do any damage to the defund movement? So it's kind of like, I'm thinking about reparations. So the reparations movement, there are some people who are firm believers that reparations must involve some form of cash payment. There are others that come along and say, well, reparations doesn't have to involve cash payments. It can involve, some kind of remedial educational support or healthcare support, etc. And sometimes those folks who believe that cash payment is a must believe that those people who say no can be healthcare or education, that they're watering down the movement and in some ways doing harm to the movement. Do you think in the context of defund, those that say, let's take 10% of LAPD's or New York PD's or Phoenix PD's budget and give it to social services, are they harming the movement in any way or watering down the fundamental principles of defund?
I would say, in short, no. I would say that when we think about the long tradition of abolition, or the kind of longer legacy of abolition, we know that there's going to be it's a long-term goal, it's a long-term fight, and one of the chapters in the book is called Pragmatic Abolition, and it's the chapter that I have with Jonathan Illen, and we have this kind of discourse around light switch abolition versus pragmatic abolition, and we kind of loosely define these as like light switch might be close all the jails and prisons and eradicate all the police tomorrow. And I don't think anyone, even some of the most radical abolitionists, actually think that is going to happen, or that is going to just solve all the problems. One of the things that we have to look at is how do we eradicate societal harms such as poverty, police brutality, and all of those things. And then to your other point, or to another point to that, is that I think it's also just still too early to see where the movement is. Bringing up reparations, I was just reading today an article out of Mother Jones. It was entitled 40 Acres and a Lie, where researchers and investigative journalists have found something like 1,250 formerly enslaved folks who actually received some compensation after slavery, and then it was taken away by President Johnson after Lincoln was assassinated, and they found some of their descendants. So, if we think about reparations as part of a longer racial justice movement, that's still happening. So again, these things aren't necessarily here today, gone tomorrow, but they ebb and flow, but they move us towards a trajectory and a justice that we want to get towards. And I think for me, I fall on the side of eradicating police. I don't believe that police actually help us or save us. But I also understand that, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and the police are going to be gone. But we have to constantly have a long-term vision of what does a society without police, without prisons look like. And until we can reimagine or imagine what that looks like, we can't take that next step. And everything is taking those next steps, but also understanding that maybe that step might be a misstep and we might need to pivot and we might need to move someplace else. And I think that's what the beauty around abolition is that it gives us the freedom to dream and allow us to make mistakes and to recalibrate and move forward.
So during a period where, again, there's a lot of focus on defunding, there was a police department, I don't remember if it's in New Jersey, I think it was New Jersey, that had gone through what people believed to be this exercise of defunding. And they were held out as a model of how other cities could get rid of their police department. But on further investigation, it turned out that, well, they didn't really get rid of their police department. They had a public safety team that very much over time mirrored police officers. They had different names and maybe different uniforms. So I'm just curious, in your interviews of all these thought leaders, has anyone created a model, or can you point to an existing model where there is no police? Because I hear you in terms of this social movement and the flexibility within this movement to dream and to envision certain systems. But I do think that there are people, and of course there are, that really would like to see what our society would look like without police. There are others who can't even imagine. I have a friend who said, Areva, if someone steals my car and I have to file a police report and my insurance company says, well, where's the police report? What am I going to give them? My neighbor, wrote on a piece of paper, my car was stolen. So there are people like that who just think that any kind of elimination of the police is nonsense, is what he would call it. But there are people, smart, educated people, who believe that there could be a system without police, literally, not figuratively, but literally without police. So when we come forward, I want to ask you, have any of these thought leaders, have they developed a system without police, or is there one that we can look to that is something that you would support, or that any of the folks that you interviewed would? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580, when we come forward.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Have you heard of the 50-30-20 rule? This can help you spend and save your money wisely. So how does it work? Distribute your dollars into 3 buckets. 50% towards needs, 30% towards your wants, and 20% goes to savings. Use this tool to help your journey to financial success. Sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company.
Many homeowners and businesses use man-made stone as an alternative to traditional stone for their countertops. Handling these products puts workers' lives at risk. Without proper conditions, workers could die from the terminal lung disease silicosis. Employers must supply respiratory protection and water systems. It's essential to wet stone when cutting it to prevent breathing in dust. Do away with dusty, deadly practices. Visit WorkSafeWithSilica.org. This is a message from Cal OSHA.
We ask seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well-trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number and put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month. If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
Linking social justice and climate justice all year long. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, Black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
Dr. Calvin John Smiley is out with a new book. It's called Defund: Conversations Toward Abolition. And we're talking about that book and what he sees as kind of a model society where police brutality doesn't exist, where discrimination in police departments doesn't exist, where we don't have to have pattern and practice investigations conducted by our Department of Justice like the one we see that's being launched today or announced today against the Phoenix Police Department. So, Dr. Smiley, are there any models that are out there that we can look to and say, well, this is a model of public safety where people feel safe, where communities are safe, and we don't have traditional police?
So the short answer is yes, right? We've seen a number of towns across the country, even before summer of 2020, that eliminated their police forces. Since 2020, I'm not 100% on my numbers, but I think there's been about 12 or about a dozen or so police forces that have been disbanded, mostly in small towns. So there might be also other things and other factors that are going into that. But what I will say is that we do know by the numbers that alternatives to police in terms of responding to violence and crime and public safety have actually reduced crime in certain areas. So, the Cure Violence campaigns where cities have introduced credible messengers and violence interrupters who might be folks who are system impacted themselves or different leaders in their community to deal with conflict have dramatically reduced violence in those cities. We also know that there are programs like the National Bail Project, where it's like a cycling of funds that go to pay people's bails to get them out of jail, because we know that even spending a short amount of time in jail can have collateral consequences on someone's housing, work, mental health, physical health. And so what did we learn from this? That most people, like over 90% of people, show up to court if they're bailed out. We also know that there's a significant number of cases that prosecutors throw out when people can afford their bail, because there's really not enough evidence, and prosecutors often using that kind of predatory of holding someone in a confined space to not fight their case. So there are certainly many things that are in operation. At the larger kind of scale of cities, we see a lot of movements that are pushing back against law enforcement budgets. So, for instance, in places like I think I said earlier in Atlanta, with the movement to stop Cop City, there's an ongoing movement here in New York City to close Rikers Island, to not build new city jails, to not allow Mayor Adams to build a $225 million cop training center in New York City. I mean, the police in New York already have an $11 billion budget. Where I work, CUNY only has a $4 billion budget. So, again, if we think about defund as a connecting point between reform and abolition, yes, I think some of the very first steps is thinking about how do we reallocate funds to things like education, to eliminate poverty, create stable, safe, and clean housing. How do we can provide more universal basic incomes, universal health cares that, again, someday in the future, we don't need police, or we don't need police in the way that we think about them. And to your point earlier about the example of someone having their car stolen and they need to fill out a police report, that's because that is our only system right now. And just think about that. If your car is stolen and now you have to call the police, the first person who's going to arrive is someone with a gun. And as we know, Black folks, poor folks, other folks of color, folks with mental health, who need maybe mental health checks, are sometimes the victims of the police who respond, right? So 911 is not always our friend. And so we have to think about, if your car is stolen and it's not there anymore, there is no immediate threat to your life or anyone in that vicinity. So maybe there is an alternative number, or there is an alternative group that does respond to this, takes the report, and then investigates it, whether that's through a different channel or what have you. But again, if our only system is everything that we need help with is someone responding with a gun, we know statistically that more violence can happen. And we have to figure out ways of how do we create systems of care and public safety that don't always rely on someone with a gun. And yeah, I kind of went off there, but yes.
No, absolutely. It's a fascinating point. Obviously, it's a conversation I've been having around police responding to calls of individuals with mental health issues, with developmental disabilities, and how we get police out of the mental health business, which many police departments and police chiefs will tell you they don't want to be in the mental health business. But obviously, when you're not in the business of responding to those calls, it becomes a budget allocation issue as well. In this last couple of minutes, I do want to talk about the backlash. So backlash to defund as a term, backlash to defunding the police as a concept. Today, just as Kristen Clark was announcing that investigation into the Phoenix Police Department, there's a story about J.D. Vance in Ohio trying to advance an anti-DEI bill in the Senate to basically counter an executive order signed by Joe Biden in 2021 that acknowledged that we are a diverse country and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility should be a part of the hiring for the federal government. J.D. Vance's bill won't go anywhere because the Republicans don't have the majority today in the Senate, but they are, they're telegraphing for us what is to come. So if they win the majority, we could see that bill very much passing. If Donald Trump wins the White House, we could see him undoing the executive order of Joe Biden. We saw him eliminate any kind of diversity training when he was president. So talk to us about how the backlash, let's call that a movement too, is impacting the progress that's been made by social movements like defund.
Yeah, that's the story as old as time with America. Any sort of progress is often met with a reactionary movement itself. And so, again, as I said earlier, I think this is where one of the missteps of the Democratic Party was. Instead of shying away from defund or not exploring various ways to reallocate funds away from police at the federal level, get folks at state and local levels also on that, they sided with much of the conservatism around defund. And we know largely that police unions and people in law enforcement are overwhelming, in terms of police unions, are overwhelmingly in leadership positions are white, and people in law enforcement are overwhelmingly conservative. So, Joe Biden saying, we need to refund or fund the police wasn't winning over any of these conservative cops. And so this was a moment where, if Biden other Democrats, and sure, we had a few who got behind it, but really could have taken advantage and even pulled more folks into the party and said, we're listening to you. We want to hear what some of those alternative options are. And yeah, maybe we're not going to eradicate NYPD tomorrow, but yeah, maybe there is room to re-look at budgets and how we're allocating federal funds down to states and local municipalities. Because again, one of the interesting things around police is their logic. When crime goes up, police unions and police chiefs say we need more cops because crime is out of control. When crime goes down, they say we need more cops because we're doing something right and crime's going down. There's never a point where there's saturation. So it's not about public safety for many of our people in law enforcement. It's about power. And that power comes with a lot of political cachet. It comes with a way that they can, move muscle, right? I think about Mayor de Blasio. Mayor de Blasio didn't come out like pro Black Lives Matter. He came out saying, what happened to Eric Garner was a bad thing. And for the next, 7.5 years, he had no respect within the NYPD. I mean, to the point where NYPD would turn their backs on him. And he is not the chief of police. He, the mayor, is supposed to be the top guy. And so to see that sort of disrespect doesn't show rank and file. It shows a very rogue organization that is very much about power and about getting their way.
Yeah.
And last thing I'll just say.
I'm sorry, we are out of time, Dr. Smiley. Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me again. Make sure you check out his book. It's called Defund: Conversations Toward Abolition. Pick it up wherever books are sold. Next voice for you will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us. Thank you, Dr. Smiley. Really appreciate you. Good luck.
The state's U.S. Attorney's Office says 58-year-old Mark Adams Prieto of Prescott, Arizona, about 100 miles north of Phoenix, was charged. The agency says